When we ask the question, who do we want to be becoming? The stories that we tell about that are, well, you only have so much control over that. It relates to your attachment model, it depends how much trauma you've had. It depends, what country you were born into or what world you were born into. And that is all true, right? These are all real influences on who we are becoming. Some people would say there is no control, it's just your DNA, right? A genetic determinist. Who you are is determined before you even are conceived. But I find the idea that there's something that we can not control, but we can choose. We have some agency around, and it is our attention.
Welcome to the Examined Life podcast. Today, I am delighted to be sharing my conversation with Elizabeth Oldfield. In it, we talk about character formation, the forces around us that are shaping us through harnessing and pushing and pulling our attention, and how we can become the kind of people we would like to be by the time someone starts reading our eulogy. In the video, you might notice that my screen often seems to freeze. That's a shame, but Elizabeth's face is much more interesting to look at than mine. So hopefully you can not be too distracted and just focus on Elizabeth and all the interesting things she says. I loved this conversation. I hope you will too. Do please like, share, comment on it, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. So Elizabeth, thank you very much for joining me. I wonder if we could just get straight in. In your podcast, you dive straight in with what is sacred. I'm going to dive straight in with what is the question that you've been animated by and you think we do well to be asking ourselves.
It's going to sound very meta, but what a great question about questions. I am married to someone for whom good, honest questions is their sacred value. And I do kind of coaching and reflective listening to people, which is almost entirely question-based and can be extremely transformative for people. And I am very moved and inspired by the life of Jesus, who asked way, way more questions than he did kind of give straight answers to things. So I would align with you in attention to the power of a good question as a way of living intentionally and fruitfully. And when you said, what is the question you think we should be asking ourselves? The thing that kind of bubbled up in me was, who am I becoming? Because, or maybe who are we becoming? Because I think a lot about what sounds like quite a technical theological term. And I think it is originally a Jesuit term, this idea of formation, this idea of how we change and grow over the course of our lives and how we can do that more carefully and with more purpose rather than just allowing the kind of events and the influences and the situations that we find ourselves in to shape us, towards cynicism or hope or despair or courage or cowardice or these kind of big virtue words. What does it mean to think about the kind of person we want to be at the end of our lives? The kind of things we would love people to say about us at our funeral. What do we want our lives to be defined by? And then work back from there and think, okay, if actually I'm less concerned about being famous or, earning a lot of money or finally getting a kitchen island or a flat stomach, than I am about someone standing up and saying she cared for other people or she was brave or she lived a life defined by generosity. Knowing what I know about myself, I am neither those things yet. And if I'm not careful, will just become less those things. How do I set out my life and focus my intention and journey alongside people that give me the best possible chance of becoming those things that I want to define my life? So there's lots of ways we could go with that and directions we could go in. But I think that heart check of, is this who I want to be becoming? Is this not I want to find and somehow, archaeologically dig out my true self, which is perfect and eternal. And if I can only find my true self, I will be, fully actualized in the world. But I'm always changing and growing, and I want to point myself in the direction towards the good. That's the question that leads me.
That's an incredibly rich question. You brought to mind David Brooks's distinction between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. So for you, this question of formation comes out of reflecting on, what do I want people to say about me at my funeral? And what's my idea of the good or the flourishing life? Have there been moments when this question has become a particularly sharp one? Ways that you feel like, oh, I'm being formed in this way, to the good or not? You realize that this really is the question I need to keep coming back to. Who am I becoming?
I don't know that I would have framed it quite like that, but there was a real fork in the road in my life at university because I had been very involved in drama and performance and had been kind of Saturday morning stage school kid. I did tap, I did ballet, I did jazz, I did drama GCSE, I did theatre studies A level, and the sort of trajectory of my honestly, if someone had said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I would have said Judy Dench. That is what I want to be when I grow up.
That's
To
a pretty
be
good role model to have, I
I
think.
want to be a national treasure.
Yeah.
I want to be someone who is an extraordinary performer who uses that talent to bless people's lives. And in my first year at university, I got a bunch of different parts with the drama society, and it's so embarrassing looking back, but definitely like felt myself to be the sort of one of the upcoming young actors on campus, and this university is so funny, isn't it? It's this like weird microcosm of society and these like hugely overinflated egos, and it's a tiny arena that feels huge, but there were sort of like third years who were aspiring playwrights and directors, and they wanted me to be in their plays, and I'm brilliant. I was acting some parts which I found really fascinating and interesting, but weren't particularly lovely people to inhabit. I had this really funny thing where I had to have special lessons on how to say the C word because I couldn't say it with conviction. I was spending a lot of time deliberately immersing myself in different characters, different people. I played Lady Macbeth and loved playing Lady
Hmm.
Macbeth. The nature of being a tall woman is you play character parts. It's very like that industry is very clear. If you are short and hot, you play bland leads. And if you are tall and brunette, you play character roles. You play villains, you play prostitutes, you play the interesting ones. But those were the kind of parts that I was always getting. And then I had become a Christian when I was about 15, and this was kind of running alongside that. And on one of my summer holidays, I went with a group with a development charity to Kenya to work alongside a charity out there that was working with children living in the slums. And we were basically there to relieve the Kenyans so they could go and deliver the aid and education and medicine to children in the slums. So there's always questions around those kind of projects, and some of them are definitely kind of problematically white saviory, but I think this one was as thought out as it could be about how do you use basically the free labor of students to do something good for people who actually need it and don't make it about the students. So we were there like building accommodation and helping cook and various other things. But it was my first exposure to the reality of grinding poverty for most of the world, and my first up close encounter with just the shattering injustice that defines so many people's lives. I came back and had this real sense of discomfort and disconnect between the thing I had thought I wanted to do and how it was forming me,
Hmm.
and the kind of lives that I had got to know and made friends alongside and seen the sort of the struggle and the value of people working in that sector. And I went back and did another play and found myself in the bar afterwards, like drinking in the compliments and feeling my ego kind of stretch and purr, and just had this real, I don't think this is good for me. I don't think I
Hmm.
currently have the kind of character that can cope with other people's praise about who I am in my body and myself and my presentation on a stage. And presumably who would also not have been able to cope with other people's criticism or their dismissal or their ignoring, right? The life of a performer felt likely to feed the worst parts of myself. And I don't think that's true of everyone. I think that's a really noble calling, and some people are called to it and have a really steady sense of self and can do that kind of work without becoming a monster. And we need those people. But I was like, I think this is going to make me a monster. And I want instead to work out, are there ways about the way our world is set up and the way that we live together and the deep injustices and the deep divisions between us that I can have a go at tackling. Exactly, but that was the turn.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Elizabeth. I didn't know that you had this history of stage work. It's fascinating. And that kind of Damascene moment is really interesting. I'd love to come back to the ways you have sought to deliberately be shaped and formed. Like you live in a small community.
Mhm.
There's all sorts of things you do. But perhaps before going in that direction, picking up on this theme of having one's ego massaged, being like center stage of one's, I think that's just a very natural place to go when you're receiving praise, when you literally have a follow spot on you. And it seems like that's just social media culture generally now, like
Mm.
Instagram or whatever. The idea of being the star part in the movie of your life. To what extent do you see that being a very formative influence on people who are not, Amdram or, aspiring professional dramatic, but just it's in the air and water of the culture we're in now. So I guess, sorry, this is a clumsy question. My question is, do you see that kind of formative influence being pretty toxic generally?
Mm. Yes, I think it defaults to that extremely easily, and I feel it in myself. I've kind of come full circle, and I feel not full circle, but like 2 decades later, I'm writing and doing more public things, and I'm not acting, but I am sort of not behind an organization now. I'm more, I'm writing under my own name. I've got a book coming out. All of these things which are closer to the life I walked away from. And I hope, and I kind of, I'm a Christian. So in my tradition, I pray about like, is this okay? Like, have I put my roots down deep enough now? Like, have I got a steady enough sense of self to do this without turning into a monster? I really hope I have. But it means that some of those temptations are more live for me. When I was using social media in my previous job, it was much more like, we have this report out. And if people liked it and shared it, I felt a glow of collective
Mm.
achievement. But if, it wasn't as compulsively addictive as it is when I write a piece and I put it online and then I have to do everything I can to stop myself going dopamine mining. It's like, oh, check again, check again, check again. Affirm me, affirm me, affirm me. I have to have all these blockers. I have to have very strong disciplinary approaches and like 24 hours off all technology a week and a week a year where I have nothing, and like regularly removing myself from that arena and going, is your sense of self stable enough without this? Like, this can be a tool to communicate some things I need communicating, but if it's where I'm finding my worth and my identity, it is definitely not forming me into the kind of person I want to be. It's forming me into a performing monkey for that algorithm. That is not what I want someone to say at my funeral.
So that this is potentially helpful in a practical level because you're a kind of public figure. You have a significant following. It's still a danger that you feed the beast. And so, what you mentioned practices here somewhere in that, like a Shabbat practice of new technology. What are
Yeah.
the counter formation practices that you feel keep you grounded? Because I think people who are not public figures, we all still struggle with these kinds of algorithmic dopamine hit kind of thing. So this is helpful advice, I reckon, Elizabeth, as someone who's
Hmm.
grounded and yet in the public eye.
I'm
What do
going
you
to
do?
preach to
What's your
my own
secret?
soul here, Kenny. And I think public figure is definitely an overstatement, but we are in a time when we have lots of micro public figures because of all of these overlapping filter bubbles that we all sit in. I find, and this is something I've been writing about a lot, I find the kind of practices of my tradition just enormously useful. I became a Christian into a part of the church that does have very formative practices, but doesn't think of itself as liturgical, doesn't think of itself as intentional, puts high value on kind of emotional experiences, on things happening in the moment, on free prayer, those kind of things. And honestly, I still love that stuff. It's still a big part of my life. I have no disdain for it. But I lost my faith, became an atheist, or tried to be an atheist. I failed at being an atheist, and then I found my way back in. So Rowan Williams talks about that one of the hidden geniuses, it's probably my phrase, not his because it's clumpy, of religions are the way they help us structure time. And the way we structure time is how we structure attention. And the way we structure attention is the way we form ourselves. And so almost every religious or spiritual wisdom path will have really clear structure of time, really clear rhythm, and importantly, repetition. There's a famous phrase, no formation without repetition. And we live in a novelty culture, right? We're going to have green drinks this week. That's boring. The next new thing is gong baths. The next new thing is microdosing or whatever it is, the search to stabilize ourselves and to be becoming the kind of people we want to be, right? I don't think it's not a question that, like, most people are asking that question implicitly or explicitly, but because of hedonic adaptation, because of the way capitalism works, the sort of undifferentiated secular marketplace runs on novelty. And so it will say, this thing will change you. This other thing will change you. This other thing will change you, and keeps dragging you into new and different practices, new and different focuses for your attention, new and different rhythms. I think the kind of genius of things that have been done for 2,000 years is there's no novelty. We get up, I live in this, we sometimes call it micro monastery, tiny intentional community, 2 families. We've turned a shed at the end of the garden into a chapel, and we pray, not every day, but we pray a lot of days, morning prayer in the morning. And at the moment it's pitch black, and we light some candles and we pray the same words, listen to different bits of the Bible, but we pray the same words. And then in the evening, we pray Compline, and it's dark, and we pray. There's a different, in the book reads, there's different Compline for the day of the week, but we mainly do it on a few days. And so we're always hearing Monday Compline, right? We're always hearing Thursday Compline. Teach me, dear Lord, to number my days, that I may turn my heart unto wisdom, right? There's a midday prayer that we pray a lot. Let the beauty of the Lord be upon me, and establish thou the work of my hands. Like, when you're worried that my work will be all about my beauty and my glory and my edification and my self-actualization, none of which I think is the root to satisfaction, I am in a set of rhythms that mean I am repeatedly, without having to choose to or remember to, say the words, let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon me, and establish thou the work of my hand. And the structures of regular, repeated written prayers, which my younger self would have been like, that sounds so boring. Repetition is boring. It's all about free expression. God, I sound like turning to classic middle-aged conservative turn. But the way the things we repeatedly pay attention to form us are baked into my tradition. And so I'm just increasingly wanting to draw deep on those resources. So yes, a practice of Sabbath, morning and evening prayer, sacred reading, being part of a congregation, right? The people that are not like me, do not care how many followers I have on social media. I'm just Liz, who is on the prayer team, or, someone who they chat to over coffee, and they probably are from a completely different country, from a completely different socioeconomic background, like being in community with people not like me, who are interested in me as a person, not me as a product or me as a sort of status signifier they can hang on to, which is what we do with people in public far too often. We do this kind of attempt to stabilize our sense of self by being associated with the kind of people that we want to be becoming, rather than working on it for ourselves.
That's why I'm talking to you, Elizabeth. Asking this question, who am I becoming? Maybe another way of asking it is, what is getting my attention, or a way of getting to that answer. And what strikes me is the kind of attention that you're paying. So I think Oliver Burkeman uses the word atelic, like inhabiting time that doesn't have some instrumental purpose to it. That form of word is beautiful or whatever. You're not leveraging that for whatever in the future, or spending time with the diversity of your congregation it's not time that can be, measured out and weighed like we do everything else in the marketplace.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could say something about that, the kind of attention you pay, not just what you're paying attention to, but the kind of attention you pay is formative on who you become.
Absolutely, yes. And I think, as you know, I'm very influenced by the work of Ian McGilchrist, and the shorthand he always uses is attention is a moral act. And it's a very radical change when I realized that the time I spend scrolling in Instagram is not just dead time, right? It's not just lost time or passive time. It is active time, and it is actively forming me. Those images are forming me. That restlessness of my thumb, looking, what am I looking for? Something, a sort of snackish, satisfying of something pretty, something funny. What is that? I was really uncomfortable saying it because I am so far from being effectively unaddicted to these things. But I think that sense of when we ask the question, who do we want to be becoming? It's really hard. Sometimes it's really, the stories that we tell about that are, well, you only have so much control over that. It relates to your attachment model. It depends how much trauma you've
Mm,
had. It depends what country you were born into or what world you were born into. And that is all true, right? These are all real influences on who we are becoming. Some people would say there is no control, it's just your DNA, right? The genetic determinists. Who you are is determined before you even are conceived. But I find the idea that there's something that we can not control, but we can choose. We have some agency around, and it is our attention. And that, it's funny because my tradition has talked about this for centuries, like literally for centuries, that this idea of formation, that what you read, what you sing, what you say, and who you spend time with is who you are becoming. And now we know, because of research into neuroplasticity, the mechanism of that we have neural pathways. And the more we use particular neural pathways, the more they are strengthened. And it's why forming new habits is so hard, because we have put so much, the like repeated ritual liturgical action of that habit has created a kind of easily is it created a furrow which is easy to go down. And in
mm.
order to create a new habit, you kind of have to hack your way through the compacted walls of earth to create a new furrow, to create a new pathway for yourself. But I find it very both liberatory and sort of pleasingly achievable. So I'm like, okay, if I set up my day knowing that it will be uncomfortable to pay attention to this poem because doesn't have any notifications on it, or this prayer because I didn't write
Mm.
it and therefore it's not completely tailored to my preferences. It might have, a pronoun in it I don't like, or some language in it. That is not what this exercise is about. This exercise is about sitting in attention on something that I know has something to teach me, has something that I want to learn from. And living in community, we have a huge amount of time when we just invest in our relationships, we just spend time together. And I want to turn my attention to my members of our community repeatedly for its own sake, because I want to know them and I want to be known by them. And that doesn't increase my comfort. It doesn't increase my convenience. It doesn't really help me optimize anything. But we deepen in love. These are one of these great virtues that I want to define my life. We deepen in our ability to live in intimacy and live in respect and live in these things that really do satisfy our hearts, that are hard and slow and costly, and which we are not trained to choose because we're constantly being distracted away with things that are like easier by sweets and flashing lights and shallow things. And I want to be turning my attention towards what's deep and slow and real.
I think what you said there, that these things are not easy, they're not convenient. You meet resistance when you're trying to pay attention to things that don't have bells and whistles and so on. I feel like that's key in terms of the relationship with technology. What technology has done is just make life easier and easier. It's not demanding at all. It's convenient. And we're shaped in the mold of a convenience culture until you've got some dystopian Wall-E type future where everything is done for you, but your character has withered away. And
Yeah.
so it's leaning into things that are uncomfortable and not, you know, being happily distracted from the task at hand, which is often other people, right? Or
Yeah.
ourselves. It seems to be the two things we often want distracted from are ourselves and the challenges that come from our relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
think of that stuff as soul work. Like,
mm,
did I do any soul work today, or did I just do busy work?
bit of
An
Ignatian kind of
examine. So I go on retreat at least once a year, and I'll often do a kind of examine of the year where I look back and think, right, the Ignatian word is consolations and desolations. In some ways they're kind of highs and lows, highlights and
mm,
lowlights, but they're also in the Ignatian language, like, when did I turn towards God? When did I turn
mm.
towards love? When did I turn towards what is deep and real and true? And when did I turn away? Like, when did I choose the wide and easy path? When did I draw away from God? When did I draw away from love? When did I draw away from other people? And I talk about sin as disconnection. And so it's, when did I really allow myself to connect with myself or other people or the earth or with the divine? And when did I disconnect? When did I passively or actively choose disconnection? And so
And
I'll do that practice on retreat, but it is one of those intentions that I've never quite managed to do it late at night and look back over the day. I would love to.
yeah, I mean, well, likewise, I'm an absolute failure at it, but you need to kind of, it's creating that space. You don't really get it's not something you can slip into the day very easily unless you're deliberately kind of boundarying some space for doing that soul work, as you say.
Yeah. I mean,
Like,
it's one of the reasons I live in community that I am not by nature a personally disciplined person. I
mm,
am distractible. I like novelty. I
yeah,
am not someone with very much willpower. And the joy of community is there's scaffolding, there's trellis, right, for the plant
mm,
that I want to be growing. I absolutely hate getting out of bed in the morning. I am like a bear with a sore head, but we get up and we pray at 6:30 on a Monday morning in a freezing cold chapel because there are other people who are expecting me to be there. And therefore, I don't have to make that choice every Monday morning. It is sort of already made, and that positive peer pressure works. And I have never had a time when I've got up for morning prayer and regretted it. And so when I ask the question, who is it that I want to be becoming? The way I am answering, or the way I am using the answer is, right, what do I need to set up in my life to make it easier for myself? What do I need to commit to publicly in advance to give my future self, who is as weak and feeble as I am, the best chance of making the choice I hope she makes, right? How do I actually reduce my choices? How do I act against the formation of my society that says more choice equals better? And go, no, I'm going to narrow my choices. I'm going to rule some things out. Like, we are now financially and legally locked in to living in community with our housemates because we wanted to covenant together. We wanted to commit together. We wanted to remove our ability to go, this is hard. I'm off. You wanted to essentially get married because marriage
mm.
can hold you when the feelings and the warm and cuddlies are not there. But you can move through that season and come out in a deeper place. So yeah,
I
fewer choices. I always need fewer choices.
Yeah, the tyranny of choice, right? I mean, I'm with you in terms of liturgies that kind of support you when the enthusiasm isn't there, but scaffold the kind of person you want to be. I'd love at some point to trade notes with you, Elizabeth, on how your community is going. In lockdown, we did the same thing with another family. And it's the only time we've successfully managed to, as you use the word trellis, it's a lovely word for it, trellis our life around the rhythms of prayer and cooking and meal times and so on. And the more we've been allowed to kind of, since that, really, it was a very spacious time in lots of ways. The more we've been allowed to be just individuals, the more that we failed at creating that space to really lean into the question of who am I becoming?
Yeah.
I
Because we've only got so
wonder.
much capacity, right? It is not the sort of Mark Zuckerberg thing of completely reducing his wardrobe choices. We have only so much decision making capacity, and we're using a lot of it on work or on caring responsibilities. Therefore, when we get to these big soul work choices of where do we spend our attention and what do we choose to orient ourselves towards, there's not much left. And so I'm like, okay, how do I Mark Zuckerberg my spiritual life and reduce my choices so that I'm not having to repeatedly dig into an extremely empty well of willpower to choose the thing that I know is actually good for me?
Just reducing the friction on that very significant soul part of life. I wonder if you've got this book coming out, and maybe you don't want to talk about it at all. You're keeping that down low, but if you're happy to, I wonder if that question, "Who am I becoming?" Do you kind of rephrase that to yourself? Am I becoming more fully alive? Is that another way of a kind of telos for that question, if you like?
Yeah, I would say that's probably the summary of my answer to that question. I want to be fully alive. I want to be brave. I want to be loving. I want to be free. The book was a really joyful way of scaffolding my attention, right? Once you picked a book on who is the kind of person we want to be being, how do we pay attention to our souls? How do we steady our souls in a turbulent world? It meant that I had a chance to really go deep and really reflect. I used the framework of the seven deadly sins loosely to write these personal essays. And so digging into that tradition and saying, okay, this feels a bit weird and a bit out of date. And, the seven deadly sins are more often used as a joke, but I have a suspicion that there's something good here. And so spending time thinking about envy and actually status anxiety, and that's
Mm.
related to the dopamine thing, right? The need for attention. How am I so assured of my belovedness and my worthiness and my seenness that I'm not having to negotiate with envy and status anxiety, or with gluttony? How do I stop numbing myself How do I actually sit with my hard feelings rather than kind of drink or eat or party or whatever, work in unhealthy, disconnecting ways in order to avoid grief or avoid fear or avoid sadness or anger. And then how do I find sources of kind of awe and ecstasy, which is what I'm really looking for when I'm kind of using and abusing substances or I'm using abusing activities. So yeah, the theme of formation emerged as I was writing about these things, these themes, these temptations in our lives and in our society as a repeated one. And I started with the sin of acedia, which is the kind of Latin word that often gets translated sloth. And sloth, a bit like the word shalom, does not really translate into peace. The word
Mhm.
shalom has many more meanings within it than just peace. The word acedia has got many more meanings in it than just sloth. And the way I think it's been used over the centuries is distraction, spiritual distraction, apathy, listlessness, spending our attention on the wrong things. And so when I started with acedia and was like, oh dear, I am spending my attention on things that are forming me in a way that I don't want to go. What does it mean to actively turn my attention to the things that are more likely to help me become the kind of person both I want to be, and that I think the world needs in this moment, right? We need to be better than we are. We have been formed to be individual self-actualizing consumers, and we are heading into a time when we're going to need to be committed members of community who have each other's backs and pool our capacity for the common good. I'm not there yet. I find other people annoying a lot of the time. I don't want my freedoms encroached on. So how do I be becoming the kind of person that the world needs? And that's the kind of journey the book goes on.
To become more fully alive,
Yeah.
as per the title. Um, as you journey towards this idea of who you're becoming more fully, and you do it through the Christian story, that's the one where you've found truth and life and so on. But you have an audience which is really broad. Do you think you can take people along with you? What are the resources that are on offer to the world through your tradition that are inclusive, if you like?
Well, I hope so. It's not a book written for Christians. A lot of Christians might find it a bit disconcerting because I'm very honest. A lot of Christian books I find difficult to read because people are being extremely careful and they're really worried about getting it wrong. They can be, not all of them, but many of them, a little bit bland. And I knew that that wasn't the kind of book I would enjoy reading or writing. It is very much a book for people who would not call themselves Christians, who would not call themselves religious, who don't know what they think about any of that. The world is really unsettled, and there doesn't seem to be any hope that it's going to get nice and easy again. This mid to late 20th century thing of progress is just going to go on. And humans, we've got this, we've nailed this, we've applied our reason, and kind of liberal democratic enlightenment will just roll out across the world and all will be well. That's a hard story to believe now.
Mm.
And many people, I think, are going, okay, what have we done? What is this world that we've left our kids? How have we ended up hating each other this much? Why, given where I'm from in the West, we have so much actual material prosperity. I think many of us just feel a background wrongness to the way that we are living and the way we want to be. What I want the book to bring is, even if you don't know what you think about God, and the idea of walking into church is either terrifying or just very unlikely because it does not seem at all relevant to you. This is 2,000 years of incredibly deep reflection on how human beings work, what it is that helps us, what are the rhythms and the rituals and the practices and the ideas that steady us and ground us. And these ideas have steadied and grounded communities through plague, the fall of the Roman Empire, turbulent times, the Reformation. There's so many times in which the world has been. I've been reading about the monasteries because we're a sort of new monastic community. We're really inspired by monastic rhythms. I've been reading about the roles of the monasteries in the Middle Ages. And there is this sense in which ways of living collectively that very often come out of religious communities. They build capacity and they build resilience, but they also build beauty, right? We have this legacy of monastic illumination, of the music of Hildegard, of Bingen. These guys were living in war-torn, plague-ridden, like poverty-ridden. Their lives were so unimaginably harder than ours. And yet they were able to find time for beauty and care and compassion. And that's what I think some of these ideas can help steady us, can help ground us, can call us back into being people who are able to connect with our neighbors across our difference, to make the kind of choices that we're going to need to live more simply in order to honor our world. The most challenging chapter of the book is about avarice, which is greed. The Christian tradition is incredibly frank about the love of money and the way that if we keep choosing comfort and convenience over the needs of the poor or the needs of the earth, we will all end up in trouble. We need to hear this. Money will not save us. Stuff will not save us. Stop living these over-consuming lives because it is killing us.
It's good to hear you say that. I absolutely need to hear this. And I feel like I don't hear it enough from the churches I go to, the people I'm around, because we've all got some skin in this game. And
Yeah, we're all
like,
implicated.
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a hypocrite when I read the Gospels, when I read Matthew 25 or whatever. It's hard to imagine what it means sometimes. It's so radical. It's so from the root different from the way that we have learned Christianity. It's almost like dusting it off and realizing that the message there is kind of radically different from the Ned Flanders moralizing religion that
Yeah,
I often think of it as. And I think
yeah,
many people do. The desire for awe and ecstasy and beauty, I think these are really powerful guides. And also, they say something about our yearning, what we're kind of after. It's interesting, a previous episode with Dacher Keltner, a psychologist who talks about awe. He says awe is when what's most meaningful to us is revealed. Think of it as a kind of veritas forum. It's when the hierarchy of our values is turned upside down. The utilitarian is at the bottom and the holy is often right at the top. A circuitous way of coming to my question. How do you see spiritual yearnings as those things that are actually lurking behind a lot of the toxic trends in our culture, a lot of the ways we've been formed? Does that make sense as a question, Liz?
yeah, it does. And I think it's another reason why I want to kind of dust off these spiritual jewels and say there is wisdom here, right? And they are misused often by Christians and they have been used to hurt people and exclude people. But actually, the deep psychological astuteness of these traditions have power in them yet. There's a woman called Donella Meadows who was one of the very first people. She wrote a book called Beyond the Limits. She was one of the very first people to kind of sound the alarm about man-made climate change. And she talks about how we are living in a society which takes these very deeply rooted human desires for community and distorts them to make them something we can buy. So you see it all the time, see it all the time in advertising. We know the psychological astuteness of advertising. They put a legitimate desire on the screen. People in deep friendship, people in romantic love. It's almost always relational. People having an adventure. These kind of situations that we long to be in that speak of meaningful lives, and then they incept a product that promises that we will. They never say, buy a Budweiser and you will have really good male friends who you can be completely yourself with and know and be known, but also laugh and it not get too intense. They never say it, but it's storytelling, right? It's the beauty and logic and the power of images and storytelling. I think not shaming ourselves for the way we're living, not saying we are a terrible, greedy, tribal civilization, but trying to sort of dig down and think, okay, this longing to belong and to feel safe is part of what's driving our tribalism, because when we're in fight or flight or we're anxious, it kicks off what's called our homophily tendency. John Yates calls it people like me. Our people like me tendency, when we are afraid or unstabilized, as most of us are most of the time now, because of the actual world, but also because of the way our media environment works, we long to just be with people like me, and we find people who are not like us scary and threatening. And if we can come to, okay, how do I get my need to feel safe and known and loved and connected and in relationship and in community met enough, then that natural tribalism response that we all have will be dialed down a bit. That longing to be meaningful, to be not just one of a great crowd, but to be seen and known and loved as ourselves. That longing for significance that drives so much of the performance on social media and, reality shows and all of these, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. How do we, through spiritual traditions or through psychological support or just through healthy interpersonal relationships, steady our soul enough not to have to go looking for that all the time, to be able to call BS on the lie that we will find it out there, in the glare of the media or in the glare of professional success. it takes the vulnerability to admit that stuff in ourselves and then think, what actually is a healthy response to that? And I have so far to go on it.
It's yeah, I mean, it's as you say, finding those needs met, but also like calling BS kind of removes the spell that it casts on us. So paying
Mm,
attention and noticing and having
mm,
the language for it. I think lots of the conversations you have and what you write about is really helpful at helping people notice the way they are being formed. So this question of who am I becoming is also like asking, what am I paying attention to? And
mhm.
what kind of attention am I paying? And how is my soul being shaped and, you know,
And you don't have to
cultivated
buy
by
into the soul language. You can just say, how are my neural pathways being shaped?
yes, for anyone listening, absolutely. But I'm 100%, I'm bought
Yeah.
in. I
Yeah.
love the soul language. I think why do I love the soul language? It feels intuitively right to me. That it's
Mm,
not talking about something that the surgeon scalpel will find or that we can find, but it's talking about something with kind of weight and value and reality.
yeah.
Anyway, it's up to you listeners whether you like the soul language or the pathway language that you furrowing pathways for your being. So we create spaces, hopefully in our day, in our weeks, in our years. I like this idea of having a week, a year of switching off, and devices seem central to that, right? That's the devices of distraction that pull you away from it. Creating spaces to realize this. But you also you live in a community for lots of reasons, lots of I think really interesting and helpful reasons that are kind of well motivated. And I presume one of the questions that is maybe implicit there is, how do we help each other become better? And
Mm.
so maybe that's a question I'd like to kind of end on is, how do we help each other become more fully alive?
I think we can just ask them that.
Yeah.
The answer will be different for each individual. In our community, we have this phrase we use, how can I love you well? Which is sort of, what do you need? But
Yeah.
it is not assuming that we know what would bless them in that moment. And it is also a statement of, I really want to love you in this moment. I really want to be your friend. I really want to be someone who is for you in this moment. How can I love you well? And I think being prepared to be the like earnest, intense person like I am and go for those deep questions, like, what do you want your life defined by? What would you like people to say at your funeral? Helping create that imaginative space, because we're, particularly British people, we're really scared of being earnest. We go straight to humor, straight to sarcasm. The vulnerability of looking these questions in the face it's really hard. We'd rather not, because it can be like a psychological depth charge. It's not uncommon for people to get a fair way through their life and then go, holy crap, I have been letting myself to become a person that I do not want to be when I die. Like, how do I change course? That's too much to deal with right now. So doing it with care and tenderness and an awareness of not deliberately setting off bombs in other people's lives, but curious, empathetic questions. Ask them where they are, ask them what they need, ask them if they are becoming the kind of person they want to be. And if they're not, what small thing might help? Like, what tiny change could they make to turn their attention to the kind of things they want to be forming them and away from the things they really don't want to be formed by?
That kind of deep listening that I think I know is very close to your own heart, that I thou kind of listening. It really brings to mind, and this is a tip for anyone who's listening and interested, the Michael Ende book Momo. Have you read that? The reason I read it was because you recommended Ben Quash's book Abiding, which I loved, and he's got this. It's almost a chapter on Momo. This lovely story about a French girl, and her superpower is listening. And when people are listened to, what happens? The kind of healing that occurs. There's no kind of psychic insights that she's got. She just helps
Mm.
people understand themselves. And I think, as you
Mm.
say, being kind of curious to one another or about one another and creating that space that is not instrumentalizing, not imposing, but allowing it to breathe. I wonder if you could complete this sentence for me, Liz. If you are interested or engaged by dot dot dot, you will like my book Fully Alive. What would you fill that in with?
Oh, it's such a stressful question.
Sorry,
No,
that's
it's all
fine.
good. It's fine. I need to get
I
better at this sort of elevator
Well, let me.
pitching
I
and
mean, I would say if I'm presuming, knowing your writing and speaking, if you're interested in what we've just discussed, right, in this kind of
yes.
in who you are becoming and finding some kind of compass and a what is true north in this world that feels so confusing,
Yeah.
then this is your exploration of that question. But I don't want to put words in your
No,
mouth,
it's
having
good.
asked you the
So
question.
honestly, I don't know how to answer that question because I feel I'm too close to it. But probably, and I know this because they've said nice things about it. If you're interested in the work of Krista Tippett in the States, who has a podcast called On
Mm.
Being, she has been very kind about the book. If you have enjoyed the work of Oliver Burkeman, who has a kind of philosophical reflection in public, he's been very kind about it. And there's a guy called Francis Spufford who wrote a book called Unapologetic, which is probably the closest thing to it, although it's much more female and has more jokes, I think.
Oh, I'm absolutely sold. I love those three people you just mentioned, so
Great.
I am very much looking forward to reading it. Elizabeth, it's been such a pleasure to chat to you. Thank you for being so open, for sharing from your own experience and your learned wisdom, and bringing the two together into this question: Who am I becoming? Which is one that I will try and create more space for in my days, my weeks, my years. Thank
Thank you so much for having me.